Dear Prime Minister Carney, please let this letter serve to represent that the Board of Peace is withdrawing its invitation to you regarding Canada's joining what will be the most prestigious board of leaders ever assembled at any time. That was President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social, January 23rd, 2026, excluding Canada from his Gaza Board of Peace initiative, 48 hours after Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered his speech about middle power autonomy at Davos, a public exclusion designed to punish independence. And Washington just made a catastrophic miscalculation. While Trump excluded Canada to demonstrate consequences, Canada gained credibility with every ally concerned about American unpredictability. While Trump demanded gratitude and submission, Ottawa chose sovereignty and strategic patience. While Trump assumed exclusion would force capitulation, Canada proved that refusing to pay tribute creates more leverage than purchasing access. The shock is complete. Washington believed withdrawing the invitation would isolate Canada. Instead, every European ally watching this sequence learned that Ottawa prioritizes principle over proximity to American power, and Trump has zero tools to reverse what he just set in motion. Today, we are showing you exactly how Canada's refusal to pay $1 billion for a seat on Trump's Gaza board transformed short-term exclusion into long-term strategic advantage, how UK and France rejected the same initiative before Canada did, how Putin received an invitation while Democratic allies got publicly uninvited, how this exclusion happens precisely as Kuzma negotiations approach, how European foreign ministries are processing Canada's willingness to accept consequences for autonomy, how middle power coordination becomes credible when participants demonstrate genuine commitment, and how Trump's punishment mechanism just became Canada's strongest diplomatic credential. But before we dive in, if you value analysis that goes beyond surface-level headlines, hit that like button and subscribe for coverage that reveals what others miss. Let me show you the exact timeline because the sequence matters. This wasn't gradual diplomatic cooling. This was retaliation compressed into 72 hours. Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, Davos, Switzerland, World Economic Forum. Prime Minister Mark Carney addresses global leaders. His message is direct and deliberate. Great powers are weaponizing economic integration. Bilateral negotiations systematically disadvantage middle powers. Like-minded nations must coordinate, even issue by issue, to maintain leverage against coercion. The speech garnered immediate international attention, not because the language was inflammatory, because Carney articulated what dozens of middle powers were thinking, but hesitating to say publicly. He named the pattern everyone recognized, but few dared address. Wednesday, January 22nd, Trump delivers his Davos address. Instead of engaging with policy arguments, he makes it personal and direct. I watched your prime minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. They should be grateful to the U.S.-Canada. Canada lives because of the United States. Then the directive, clear, unmistakable. Remember that mark the next time you make your statements. Not we disagree on your analysis. Not let's discuss these concerns through diplomatic channels, but be grateful. Remember your place. Submit Thursday, January 23rd, afternoon. Cabinet retreat in Quebec City. Carney responds. The language measured, but the message unambiguous. Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian. Thursday evening. Trump withdraws Canada's invitation to the Gaza Board of Peace via Truth Social, public, visible, designed to demonstrate immediate consequences for refusing submission. 72 hours from independent speech to public exclusion. That's not alliance management. That's compliance enforcement, and it just backfired spectacularly. Now let me explain what Canada was actually being excluded from, because the details reveal why this exclusion might be the best strategic outcome Ottawa could have achieved. Trump launched the Board of Peace initiative at Davos. Stated purpose, rebuilding Gaza during governance transition period. Actual structure, countries pay $1 billion United States dollars for permanent seats, while Trump oversees governance of foreign territory. $1 billion entry fee, not investment with returns, not contribution to multilateral fund with transparent governance. Direct payment for seat at table controlled by American president. Traditional European allies immediately recognized the problems. The United Kingdom rejected participation outright. France cited concerns that elements contradicted UN Charter principles. Germany expressed reservations about legal framework. These aren't minor partners raising technical objections. These are cornerstone Atlantic allies refusing to participate based on fundamental concerns about international law and governance legitimacy. Meanwhile, who did join? Israel, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, regional powers with direct territorial and political interests in Gaza outcomes. And who received an invitation? Vladimir Putin, a leader considered pariah in most international circles following full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Facing International Criminal Court arrest warrant, subject to extensive Western sanctions, Putin invited, UK rejected, France declined, Canada uninvited for asserting autonomy. That's not coalition of democracies coordinating reconstruction. That's payment-based access to American-controlled initiative with questionable legal foundation. Canada's Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, had already stated clearly before the exclusion. One thing which is clear is that Canada is not going to pay if we were to join the Board of Peace. So let's be precise about what happened. Canada was invited to pay $1 billion to participate in an initiative that major European democracies rejected. That includes Putin, that raises fundamental questions about territorial sovereignty and UN Charter compliance. Canada indicated refusal to pay the fee. Carney delivered speech about middle power autonomy. Trump withdrew invitation within 48 hours. Now, here's what American pressure advocates will argue. They'll claim Canada just lost access to influential initiative. They'll insist exclusion demonstrates Canadian weakness. They'll argue you cannot challenge Washington without facing consequences. On immediate optics, they're partially correct. Being publicly uninvited looks like punishment. Being excluded from what Trump calls most prestigious board of leaders ever assembled appears to diminish influence. Having Trump specifically cite Carney's speech creates visible connection between independence and exclusion. This is short-term cost of sovereignty. When you distance yourself from great power, that power uses exclusion as demonstration. They make consequences visible to discourage others from following same path. Pattern is consistent across history. France under de Gaulle faced American pressure after developing independent nuclear capability. India encountered sanctions after refusing alignment during Cold War. Nations asserting autonomy typically face immediate isolation attempts. Independence brings exclusion in short term. That's not theory. That's observable pattern across decades. But now let me show you what happens 6 months later, because this is where strategic patience reveals its value. Canada avoided committing $1 billion to initiative that contradicts international law principles Canada has spent decades defending. By not participating, Ottawa maintains consistency with positions on territorial sovereignty and UN Charter adherence that form foundation of Canadian foreign policy. Canada avoided association with initiative that includes Putin at precisely the moment when Western unity against Russian aggression remains critical for Ukraine support and broader security architecture. European partners who rejected the board now see Canada making parallel judgments based on similar legal and principled concerns, not following European lead, making independent assessment, reaching same conclusion. Canada demonstrated that sovereignty isn't just rhetoric. When Carney speaks about middle power autonomy, subsequent exclusion proves the speech wasn't posturing or diplomatic positioning. Other middle powers watching this sequence learned that Ottawa matches words with willingness to accept consequences. And here's the crucial element rarely discussed in immediate aftermath. Canada now has something valuable to offer in every bilateral negotiation with concerned allies. We chose principle over access. We accepted exclusion rather than compromise our values on international law. We demonstrated sovereignty isn't conditional on American approval. What can we build together? That's not weakness. That's creating maneuvering room that didn't exist before. Independence creates maneuvering room in long term, because every time Washington excludes ally for asserting autonomy, that ally becomes more valuable to every other nation concerned about American unpredictability. Look at how European allies are already processing this sequence. France rejected Gaza board citing UN Charter concerns. Then France watches Canada articulate middle power solidarity at Davos. Then France sees Trump publicly exclude Canada for that speech within 48 hours. What does Paris learn? That Canada prioritizes international law over American approval, that Ottawa accepts consequences for principle, that middle power coordination might actually work because participants demonstrate genuine commitment rather than diplomatic hedging. United Kingdom rejected participation in the board. London now observes Canada facing exclusion for similar reasoning plus broader autonomy arguments. British officials learn that Canada isn't seeking empty symbolic distance, but substantive policy independence on issues where legal and strategic concerns align. Germany, watching carefully, sees NATO ally maintain alliance commitments while refusing submission on non-security issues. Berlin's calculus about transatlantic relationships shifts when Canada demonstrates you can be excluded from Trump initiatives while maintaining defense cooperation and alliance obligations. Every European foreign ministry having same conversation right now. Canada got uninvited for saying what we've been thinking. They're accepting the cost without apologizing or backtracking. Maybe coordination with Ottawa on specific issues makes more sense than bilateral capitulation to initiatives we already rejected. That's how exclusion creates maneuvering room. Washington intended to punish. Instead, they advertised that Canada prioritizes sovereignty over access. And every middle power concerned about great power coercion just learned Ottawa is credible partner for issue-by-issue coordination. But zoom out further, because this Gaza exclusion reveals something fundamental about how American influence is transforming in ways that advantage middle powers willing to accept short-term costs. United States has started excluding allies who distance themselves, not quietly reducing cooperation, not subtle diplomatic cooling, but public, visible exclusion designed to demonstrate consequences. Think about implications. Traditional alliance management involved accommodation of diverse perspectives within shared frameworks. Partners could disagree on specific issues while maintaining overall cooperation. System tolerated significant autonomy because unity on core security concerns mattered most. What we're witnessing now is different. Disagree on governance of Gaza, excluded. Question economic integration, weaponization, publicly rebuked. Refuse to pay tribute, invitation withdrawn. This isn't alliance management. This is compliance enforcement. And here's why that shift advantages middle powers willing to accept short-term costs. Compliance enforcement systems only work when costs of exclusion exceed benefits of autonomy. For Canada, what exactly did exclusion cost? Association with Putin at moment when supporting Ukraine remains priority. $1 billion fee for questionable legal authority over foreign territory, contradiction of decades of Canadian foreign policy on territorial sovereignty and UN principles. The exclusion costs less than the compliance would have. Watch what Carney did in response. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften language. He didn't seek reconciliation through quiet diplomatic channels. Standing at cabinet retreat, he doubled down. Canada thrives because we are Canadian. That's not diplomatic hedging. That's demonstrating to every watching middle power that sovereignty is defensible even against American pressure, even when consequences are immediate and public, and timing matters enormously. This exchange happened as Canada, United States, and Mexico prepared to review CUSMA later this year. Everyone expected Canada to minimize friction before trade negotiations. Instead, Carney chose moment of maximum American leverage to articulate Canadian autonomy most clearly. That's not reckless, that's strategic. Because entering trade negotiations from position of demonstrated independence changes the psychology completely. Washington cannot claim Canada will ultimately capitulate because Ottawa just accepted exclusion rather than submit on principle. Mexico watches Canada absorb consequences and maintain position. Mexican officials learn that standing firm against American pressure is viable strategy when you accept short-term costs for long-term positioning. Other trading partners learned that Canadian commitments to autonomy aren't conditional on American approval or dependent on avoiding all consequences. Where does this lead in CUSMA context specifically? This exclusion didn't close chapter. It opened one with entirely different negotiating dynamic. Every bilateral negotiation Canada enters now carries this context. We chose sovereignty over Trump's Gaza board. We accepted his public rebuke. We maintained our position without wavering. What commitments can we offer you that demonstrate similar resolve? That's not weak negotiating position entering CUSMA review. That's exactly what Mexico and other partners want to hear when considering whether coordinated approach to American pressure makes strategic sense. Because when CUSMA negotiations intensify, when Trump threatens tariffs or demands concessions, when pressure escalates, Canada can point to this moment. We accepted exclusion from his prestigious board rather than compromise principle. We're not bluffing about our positions. We accept consequences. That credibility didn't exist before this week. Trump created it by making the exclusion public and immediate. Every time Trump excludes another ally for asserting independence, value of middle power coordination increases, because exclusion stops being punishment when enough partners accept costs simultaneously and build alternative cooperation frameworks. This is fundamental transformation in how alliance structures function, and most analysts are still measuring success by access to American initiatives rather than credibility with concerned allies. There is deeper shift happening beneath surface of this Gaza board exclusion, one that strikes at heart of how influence actually functions in multipolar environment. For decades, American power rested significantly on ability to set agendas and define what normal looked like in international affairs. Access to American-led initiatives conveyed legitimacy. Exclusion from American frameworks meant isolation. That architecture is eroding, not because the United States lacks military or economic power, because predictability and legal consistency matter more than raw capability when partners are choosing long-term alignments. When Trump excludes Democratic ally for refusing to pay tribute while inviting Putin to same table, when he demands gratitude rather than engaging with policy arguments, when he punishes autonomy speeches with immediate retaliation, he signals that access to American initiatives requires submission rather than partnership. That changes calculus for every middle power, not whether the United States is powerful, but whether American power is exercised in ways that reward long-term cooperation or demand constant deference. Canada's exclusion from Gaza board becomes proof point in that assessment, not isolated incident, pattern confirmation. Other middle powers watching this sequence evaluate whether coordination with Canada makes strategic sense, not permanent alignment against the United States, not formal blocs or rival architectures, but issue-by-issue cooperation with partner who demonstrates genuine willingness to accept consequences for sovereignty. Every time Trump makes exclusion visible and immediate, every time he connects punishment directly to autonomy assertion, he reduces cost of coordination for excluded partners because they're already paying the price, might as well gain the benefits. This is what compliance enforcement systems miss. They assume everyone values access above autonomy. They assume consequences deter rather than create common cause. They assume exclusion isolates rather than connects. For countries already committed to international law principles, already concerned about great power coercion, already searching for coordination opportunities, Canada's exclusion isn't warning, it's invitation. We got excluded for the same concerns you have. We accepted the cost. Let's coordinate where interests align. That's not isolation. That's network formation around shared assessment of risk. Where does this lead? Not toward formal alliance against the United States, toward flexible coordination on specific issues where middle powers share concerns that American approach creates problems. Trade policy where economic integration weaponization threatens sovereignty. International law where payment-based access undermines multilateral principles. Regional security where great power competition demands hedging rather than exclusive alignment. Canada doesn't need to lead that coordination, just needs to demonstrate credibility as partner willing to accept costs. Trump provided that demonstration by making exclusion immediate and public. At this stage, question confronting Washington is no longer whether they can punish allies for asserting autonomy. Obviously they can. Question is whether that punishment achieves intended effect. Intended effect: deter other allies from following Canada's path. Demonstrate costs of independence. Pressure Ottawa to moderate positions and seek reconciliation. Actual effect: advertise Canada's credibility to every concerned ally. Create common cause among excluded and refusing partners. Reduce psychological cost of coordination by making consequences visible and survivable. Canada achieved something in 72 hours that decades of diplomatic positioning couldn't accomplish. Proof that sovereignty is defensible. Demonstration that exclusion is acceptable cost. Evidence that independence isn't rhetoric. Trump provided that proof by connecting exclusion directly to Carney's autonomy speech, by making punishment immediate and public, by ensuring every foreign ministry in the world understood exactly what happened and why. What makes this moment especially significant? It's self-reinforcing. Each middle power that watches Canada accept consequences without capitulating learns that autonomy is viable strategy. Each excluded ally that builds coordination with Ottawa demonstrates that isolation isn't outcome. Each CUSMA negotiation where Canada maintains positions backed by proven willingness to accept costs shows that leverage isn't determined solely by market size. By time, full implications become visible in changed negotiating dynamics, in strengthened middle power coordination, in reduced effectiveness of American exclusion threats. Underlying shift will already be locked in. There is one final element rarely acknowledged in immediate aftermath of these exclusions. What's more valuable to Canada long-term? Access to Trump's initiatives or credibility with every ally concerned about American unpredictability? Because you cannot have both. Joining Gaza board would have required either paying billion-dollar fee or accepting subordinate status. Either choice undermines autonomy message Carney delivered at Davos. Carney chose credibility. Trump provided perfect demonstration by excluding Canada publicly and connecting it directly to independent speech. Now, Canada enters every negotiation with proof that sovereignty isn't rhetoric. CUSMA review with evidence that positions are backed by genuine resolve. Middle power coordination discussions with demonstrated willingness to accept real costs for real independence. That's not isolation. That's strategic positioning that didn't exist before this week. Remember what happens in these sequences. Independence brings exclusion in short term, creates maneuvering room in long term. We just watched both halves play out in 72 hours. Carney spoke about middle power autonomy Tuesday. Trump excluded Canada by Thursday. Short-term cost immediately visible. But 6 months from now, when Canada has coordinated with European allies on specific issues where interests align, when bilateral relationships deepen because partners trust Canadian independence, backed by proven willingness to accept consequences, when CUSMA negotiations conclude with Ottawa maintaining key positions because Washington learned Canada accepts exclusion rather than submit, that's when maneuvering room becomes visible. American power advocates will claim this proves Canada cannot challenge Washington. They'll point to exclusion as evidence of weakness. They're watching wrong timeline, measuring wrong outcomes. Because goal isn't avoiding all costs. Goal is accepting costs that create strategic advantage while avoiding costs that create dependence. Canada just demonstrated exactly that calculation, and every middle power in the world is taking notes. What has unfolded this week is not diplomatic failure, it's strategic clarity. Trump wanted to punish independence. Instead, he advertised it. Trump wanted to isolate Canada. Instead, he created credential valuable to every concerned ally. Canada didn't lose access. Canada gained credibility. And in multipolar environment where predictability and principle matter more than proximity to great power, that trade-off creates advantage that compounds over time. Question now isn't whether Washington can exclude allies. It's whether exclusion still functions as punishment when enough partners decide sovereignty costs less than submission. For more analysis on middle power coordination, alliance transformation, and strategic patience under pressure, subscribe and stay informed on what's really happening beneath the headlines.